Good morning, everyone. That was a bit limp. Should we try again? Morning, everyone. Really, really good to see you. My name's Mark Cockayne. I'm the Diocesan Director of the Parish Support Team. Not to be left out, because I'm a good Anglican, I've got to give a notice too as well. And it's simply to say that this is probably the first event of this nature where our new Diocesan Secretary is with us, Heidi. So Heidi, stand up, because not everybody may know who you are. Where is she? She's right at the back. Look, give Heidi a wave. It's great to have Heidi here, and she'll kill me for that. But do have a word with Heidi over refreshments and get to know her. Part of the responsibility of the parish support team is to help parishes implement our strategy. And at the heart of the Diocesan strategy, I don't know whether you knew this, but at the heart of our strategy is implementing a mixed economy of church. And that's why one of the last things Bishop Stephen bequeathed to us was to say we need our development day this year to be focusing on that subject. So that's why we're doing this today. And if I can have my video up now, that would be really helpful. And my task has been to put together a theological overview, a very short, you'll be pleased to hear, theological overview of this particular subject. If I can get my clicker to work. Everybody who knows me will know my skills with technology are absolutely wonderful. Got to point it the right way. That the right way? Not working? You're going to have to do it manually for me, can you? So if you put the first slide up, that'd be great. Brilliant. It's much better when you've got someone handling the technology for you, isn't it? But I want to thank God for the Fresh Expressions movement in the church. And why? Well, because it shook me out of my small-minded complacency. I've got a confession to make. It's that I used to think that I knew what church should be like. And after all, the Church of England had ordained me as a leader and priest in the church. So I believed that it needed to have word and spirit, to be biblical and charismatic with inspiring worship songs. It needed to be sacramental. There needed to be baptism for those who came to faith, and Eucharistic to feed the faithful in mission. And I found that that model worked. The churches I attended and the churches which I then led and served grew. So, of course, every church should be like mine, shouldn't it? But the Fresh Expressions movement exploded that arrogant myth. It made me realize that my church was just one church amongst many at a certain period of time in history. And if I'd taken more notice of my church history lessons at a theological college, and if I got my theology right, I would have realized that there have always been different models and styles and expressions of church throughout church history. Fresh Expressions and the mixed economy of church life is nothing new. We are just rediscovering what has always been there. We are going back to the future. And that's what I'm hoping that slide will say now. We seem to be struggling. Thank you very much indeed. Having said this, the Mission Shaped Church report, which came out in 2004, was a landmark report for the Church of England. And among the many good things it did, I want to suggest three specific important things. First of all, the term Fresh Expressions was used in this report to describe the different activities, all of which shared that desire to go out to where the people are and to let their context, culture, and the mission of God shape what the church community looks like in that place. Fresh Expressions was used in that report for the first time. And it's the go to them church, not the come to us model of church, which we had been operating with for so long in recent history. The second key thing in there was Archbishop Rowan Williams coined this phrase, mixed economy church, to explain that we need fresh expressions alongside our existing traditional models of church, but not in competition, working together. Because our society has changed, we need a range of different kinds of churches in recognition of the growing gap between the culture and where much of our church is now and where the rest of society is. And then the third key thing, I think, in that report was that it said that mixed economy church should be normative. That's why it's at the heart of our diocesan strategy, that it's part of the normal way we do church in the 21st century. Not just something for a few sort of innovative pioneers out there on the edge of things, but at the heart of church life. So the typical deanery or mission partnership or even parish might have different communities, different expressions of churches. Some will continue to meet on Sunday mornings in our church buildings. Others might meet on Saturday afternoons or midweek or in different places, in schools or different parts of our communities. Distinct churches, distinct congregations, but connected together as different parts of the body. So, a mixed economy church, but back to the future. Where do we get our theological rationale and support for a church like this? Well, many theologians will point to the church in the book of Acts as the foundation for the church's ecclesiology. Ecclesiology is just a posh word for the theology of the church. But Rowan Williams, Archbishop Rowan, quite rightly wants to go further back. He wants to go right back to creation. And he points out that the first church was not, in fact, a human invention, but it was part of God's plan. It's a community of people living in a loving relationship with God. It's an assembly of God's invited friends. If we could have our next slide, represented by Adam and Eve walking with God in the garden. And all of Scriptures, if you know your Bible, you will realize that all of Scripture leads us back to this point. So in the book of Revelation, we see the Garden of Eden there again, the New Jerusalem with the river running through it, where the dwelling of God is with men and he will live with them. This theme of community, a community of people in relationship with God, is then picked up in the Old Covenant with Abraham and the people of Israel. If we could have our next slide. Because this is a church of the people on the move, pilgrims together, walking with God's presence with them in a tent as a representative of him being the focal point, dwelling with them. And that community did not exist for itself, but through them God planned to bless the whole earth. I will bless you, God said to Abraham, and you will be a blessing. The new covenant, of course, is ushered in by Jesus in the New Testament. Our next slide, please. And here we see plainly the church as a community of people gathered round the incarnate God, Emmanuel, God with us. But even here, we have this flavor of the mixed economy. So we have the 12 disciples as the inner community. But we know that there's also a much wider community who traveled and ate with Jesus. And then on the fringes, there are other communities still. People reevaluating their lives, wanting to belong, but not quite there yet. people like Nicodemus and the Samaritan woman and the Roman centurion. All of these could be described as communities of people invited into relationship with Jesus. And then we come to the New Testament church in Acts with all its diversity. And this really is a mixed economy. So the next slide, please. First of all, we have apostolic diversity. So Jerusalem, the early church, is the base for the first Christian church. But remember, that itself could have been described as a fresh expression of Judaism. They were a small sectarian Jewish group trying to work out what being a follower of Jesus meant as they met as Jews in the context of temple worship and meeting in their own homes. To be an apostle, of course, is to be sent out. And so Jerusalem is the established sending church. It's the center. And the first edge, if you like, is Antioch, where a missionary outpost starts to gather after the church is scattered through persecution. And Antioch soon becomes the new base, the new center for Paul and Barnabas to be sent out in mission. And so the gospel moves further on and on. And what we see here is a pattern of center and edge. The established church, Jerusalem, and then the edge, fresh expressions, and then the edge becomes the center again, Antioch, and it goes out further still, center and edge, as the good news of Jesus spreads. We have geographical diversity. So within this pattern of center and edge, the church has to work out how to connect with people in different places. So first, from Jerusalem to Samaria, then Antioch to Cyprus, then Asia Minor to Rome. Each place very different. There's diversity in proclamation, in the way the gospel is shared. So, of course, in Jerusalem, in that first church, the people are steeped in the knowledge of the scriptures. And so the early disciples can share the stories based through the scriptural prophecies. But then when the Gentiles start being interested, they don't have that scriptural background. And so we start to see the disciples instead talking about Jesus and telling stories of Jesus. The style changes. And then when they go to the Greeks, they start talking about all the different gods and saying there is just one God who made all these gods. The basic message is the same, but the way it is presented changes according to the people it's presented to. We have diversity of liturgical space. So temple courts, meeting in upper rooms, people's houses, public spaces, by the riverbank, even in prisons. The focus is on building community, not on the buildings themselves. And we have diversity of missional approach. And so the Jerusalem church has a more come-to-us model of a church, an attractional style of mission, as it reaches out to the Jews first. But then when the Gentiles start to come, their instinct is to make them fit into the way we do church here in the center, to follow our customs and practices. The church on the edge has to be very different. That has a we'll come to you approach, more an incarnational model of mission, going into the places where the people are and staying there to work out what church must look like in that context. That's a brief overview of the book of Acts, but of course church development doesn't stand still. It doesn't end with the book of Acts. We've got another 2,000 years of church history. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through it step by step. But we can see this center and edge, this come to us and go to them approach starting to emerge throughout history. You only have to think of things like the rise of monasticism, the Celtic missionary church, the life of St. Francis of Assisi, the Anglo-Catholic slum priests, the charismatic renewal. And you can read it today in the writings of the current Pope, Pope Francis, in his publication, The Joy of the Gospels, which is an inspiring call to joy-filled evangelization and radical mission. So what might all this unity and diversity look like in our own context in the Diocese of Sheffield today? Well, if we put up the next slide, it could be represented as something like this. As you see in your Bibles, don't you, these sort of images of Paul's missionary journeys as he goes out further and further. So, you know, the first thing on this side might be about renewing our existing churches. Maybe it's about starting an all-age worship, or about revitalising one of our midweek congregations. If we go further still, then it might be thinking about how something we're already doing might become church in its own right. We've had a great example in that video from Nata, taking a coffee club and thinking, how might that become church? And then if we go out further still, it might be a mission initiative to connect with people who don't yet come to church. I think you'll see another example later today of a children's activity which has become church for the people who go there. But it's not classic Sunday church, it's how to go where people are at the moment. Or it might be further still, a major new mission initiative, a church plant into an unreached part of the parish or the community, or maybe something with a bishop's mission order. And then right on the edge, the pioneers working right on the edge, building community with completely unchurched people. I wonder where you'd place your church in that wave. Where are you in that wave, and where are you moving? So, in summary, I want to suggest that the Mixed Economy Church is good news for the Diocese of Sheffield. And if you go to George Ling's seminar today, you will see how fresh expressions and new models of church and mixed economy church is actually in every tradition now, church tradition in this diocese. Anglo-Catholic, central, charismatic, liberal and evangelical. And many of them are growing out of acts of service, reaching some of the very, very poorest and most deprived people in our diocese. Christian formation and discipleship and engaging with the Bible are core features of many of these fresh expressions, and many have matured enough to be fully sacramental, with baptism and Holy Communion a regular part of church life. You might be surprised to hear that around 20% of all churches in our diocese now are classed as fresh expressions, and they make up about 13% of regular church members now in this diocese, many of whom have never been in contact with the church before, a great many of whom are children and young families. This is really, really good news. All this is why the focus of our day today is not what is mixed economy church. We know that you've already got that. Or even why should we be doing it? We know that you've got that as well, because we already are doing it in so many places. The focus on this day is therefore about how do we keep moving forward together on this exciting journey with God. How can we learn from each other? How can we encourage one another, build one another up, inherited and fresh expressions, working together to respond to our God-given commission to share the good news of Jesus' saving love with the people of our diocese. It's now my great joy, you'll not see him until we've seen a video, but it's my great joy to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, and we are really very, very, very blessed to have him. Canon, the Reverend Canon, he's not a very formal guy. I know him well. He's a good friend of mine and a close colleague. But his official title, I think, is still the Reverend Canon Phil Potter. He is the Archbishop, Missioner, and leader of Fresh Expressions in the diocese, in the Church of England, rather, the Archbishop's Missioner. He is an incredibly gifted evangelist, pioneer, teacher and pastor. Not only has he got a national ministry, he's got an international ministry. And bishops and dioceses from all over the world call on him to help them think through some of the things we're looking at in our diocese. So we're really privileged to have Phil with us. Before he took up that post, he was the Director of Pioneer Ministry in the Diocese of Liverpool, and it's no surprise that Liverpool is right at the forefront of developing a mixed economy diocese. And before that, he was Vicar of St Mark's Haydock, a pioneering church I know a little bit about, but Phil was there before me and Vicar there for 20 years. So he's a practitioner. He's not just a man who knows about the theory. He's done it and he knows how to do it. So it's a great privilege for us to have Phil with us. And he's a modest man, which is why he's asked me to plug his book rather than him do it himself. And just to say, he has got a really helpful new book out called Pioneering a New Future, which unpacks a lot of what we're looking at today. And if you want interested in getting those, I think there are only a few copies. Liz has got some for sale at the bookshop. So that's Phil, but before he comes to speak to us, hopefully we're going to see his opening